Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final episode of the season of the Talent Game podcast. This one is all about the role of the COO, Chief Operating Officer, and we've got two fantastic COOs with me today. And so let's dive in and meet them both. So, Viki, I'd love to hear a quick introduction from you.
Yeah, so I'm Viki, and I'm the COO of Airship, formerly known as Airship Interactive. We are an art end-to-end service provider, production studio. So anything from concept art all the way through to integration, cinematics, etc. I've been there 4 years this week as it goes. Feels like 2 minutes, but also 10 years at the same time. Yeah, and I cover everything operational from the art team through production, through IT and operations on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant. And hey, congratulations on the work anniversary as well.
Thanks, yeah. It does creep up on me every year, I must admit.
Yeah. And over to you, Katya.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Katya. I'm co-founder and chief operating officer of Redhill Games. We started initially as the game development company and over time pivoted to service provider, to co-dev. And at the end of the journey, which is now 8 years or so, we were doing full cycle and art-related projects. And for the moment, so we are thinking over the strategy, what to do next.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. And yeah, it's funny to have like two COOs of co-dev studios, and you both your companies focus on PC console. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, console, some mobile, Steam. Yeah, we do the whole shebang, really. Some VR as well, we've been, included in
Yeah,
creating
brilliant.
for those IPs too.
Cool. And yeah, we'll definitely get into this. But before we hit the record button, we were talking about how like the COO role can mean many different things at different companies. And even then, Viki, in your short intro, you were like, I do IT and operations and these things. So yeah, looking to dive into that variety in a bit. But before I do, the first question I ask everybody is, what are you playing right now? So I'll go to Katya first. Yeah, Katya, what are you playing right now?
Considering lack of time with the duties of COO, when you need to do pretty much everything to enable your developers to develop, mostly I'm playing New York Times games, like before everything starts or at the end to wind down. My favorite game, though, is The Witcher 3. But that takes time. You need to sit down, like put everything aside and just enjoy. Or you need a longer flight to play it on the Steam Deck, then it works as well. But on a day-to-day, it's more like short mobile games to compete with people.
Yeah, great. Two great answers there, because I was just, whilst eating my bowl of cereal this morning, completing the MIDI, the new crossword on the New York Times app. I'm someone who pays the $1 monthly subscription. I same thing. It's a great little habit. The crossword and yeah, what's the other one? Challenges? I can't remember. But the
the crossplay, and also pretty much you can compete in any of their games. And
yes,
along the time we had competitions in the company as well.
Cool.
You know, who can solve Wordle, for example, with the less attempts.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. Good answer. And also, The Witcher. I don't know if you can. Yeah, I don't think you can see it off the side, but I do have a good Geralt statue just over there. That's also one of my all-time faves. So, yeah, nice. How about you, Viki? Anything you're playing at the moment?
Yeah, so I go through fits and starts. Sometimes I have periods of time where I get really into an IP, and then others I don't play for a long time in between that. But I picked up the Switch over Christmas break and downloaded a cozy game. It was a tiny bookshop, so you're a little bookshop keeper. You've got a little caravan type bookshop, and you go around sort of this coastal town, and sometimes you can pitch outside of the supermarket, or you can go to the lighthouse, and you've got sort of different customers. It's just so chill, and the seasons change. And it teaches a lot about literature, actually, more than you would probably think. You go, oh, I remember reading that book, or I remember reading that book. And you have to give recommendations, and you get tips, and you can make coffee. It's just really sweet. And it's just easy to pick up and put down. Like, there's no milestones. You don't have to worry about timing or like narrative story. But I guess favorite games are probably couch co-op games. I like collaborative playing. I'm not really into solo play unless it's something like that. I like the chaos of couch co-ops as well.
Yeah.
Like when you're all kind of competing, that kind of battle royale sort of vibe. Yeah. Maybe because I
Yeah.
deal with chaos every day. It's kind of just
Yeah. Yeah. It's just
yeah,
it's
that's kind of what
training.
what I play, but also really into kind of Wordle and sort of quick play things like that too.
Brilliant. I was just going to say, that game, as you said, Tiny Bookshop. Yeah. I have 3 daughters, and at the weekend we were scrolling through on Switch, just like, I'm like, let's have a look at the current offers. And I swear that one came up, and that,
You
like, I
should
think the
totally
artwork.
download it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful game.
It's
I
funny
made a
because
note.
it's funny. I tried to get them into like competitive multiplayer stuff, even like Mario Kart, and they're like, and you know, I load up Super Smash Brothers for them, which is a fighting game, right?
Top game.
They,
Top game.
yeah, and they'll just pretend that like, they're toys. They're like, oh look, follow me and let's run, and they'll explore a level together. I'm like, that's so funny. I'm like, well, that works if they're playing games and having fun. I don't really care. That's a good suggestion. Because I did see that, and maybe I'll go back onto it. Okay, hey, so let's get into the I guess the main part of the conversation today. So I think starting off, I'd love to hear about like your take on what your role is, like how you describe this COO position at your game studio or your co-dev studio. Yeah, Vicky, like how would you describe like what you do day to day?
It's really hard to find like a set of words to describe exactly what a COO does, because it does differ from industry to industry as well. I think games, the COOs tend to be quite similar. You know, we wear multiple hats, we do multiple jobs. I would best describe myself probably as the strategic glue on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, in some studios, they might have a head of studio who is a similar sort of subset of skills. But a general day to day for me would be looking after the production department and, you know, checking in on the health of all the projects that we're working on, where they're at. Are there any struggles? Are there any escalations that they need to work with me on? And communication, you know, challenges with clients. From an art perspective, again, these are managed top down. So although I'm on the shop floor, I do have a head of that looks after those departments as well. About the sort of pipelines that the artists are working within, you know, understanding the workflow challenges from client to client, skill gap analysis, you know, constantly upskilling all of the artists to ensure, you know, top deliverable products. There's so many complexities with that. This is incredibly top level, so it sounds quite easy and straightforward, but it is quite a smorgasbord of things that go on day to day. And then IT and operations. So operations as a business, so not just from a development point of view. So that can be anything from the softwares that we use, the agreements, the IT infrastructure, the policies and procedures for us as like a global remote studio, all of the challenges that a global team presents. Talent and HR all come under me as well. I guess the only sort of department that I don't really touch on a day-to-day basis is business development and marketing, though I am involved in those loosely. Those are headed up by our CEO. So you can imagine my day is quite a wide mix of things. So at the moment, we're working on all of the new HR policies that the government have introduced to the UK, and we're having to refresh, rewrite, and start from scratch on a lot of those, introducing those. We do a whole benefits survey at the start of the year, and then renew the offerings based on what people actually want from their employer. We've just rolled out a flexibility pilot, which has introduced 4 new ways of working across the company, whether that's condensed working weeks, condensed fortnights, maximum flexibility, which is where you can come and go throughout the day without explanation, so long as your milestones are met, and various other things. So there's constantly something happening, of which I'm overseeing, designing, you know, or helping with the implementation plan. So I guess business transformation and anything big like that would always start and end with me, and then day-to-day running. I think the most important thing is how I align with the CEO and his vision. I call myself the executioner in terms of I execute his ideas once we've honed and polished them to a way that, will work for the business long term. So sort of translating his vision into reality really, and then, running the business, running the sort of shop floor on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
And
great.
that's the best way to explain it, really.
Yeah, and I was thinking you were like, oh, I don't touch much on business development, but I know that you were just out at GDC, like helping to do close some
Yeah,
business
okay.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I do a lot of
Mate,
talking and traveling, yeah, as well.
yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so really, taken for that summary, there really isn't any part of the business that you don't have some influence on, with the aim to improve. Also,
Yeah,
I
even
like this.
margins,
Yeah,
because of production and the way that we work and, how you cost against, the artists themselves. We carefully look at margin every single month, burn rate, how well a project is doing, its health. So commercially, I have to be very astute as well. So yeah, it's very hard to sort of explain it really
yeah,
without hours and
yeah.
hours of granular detail.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And also I like this idea of this nickname of the executioner. You coming along with an axe and a hood, but
I mean, I did have that nickname years ago, but for a very different reason. But now it's more of I execute the ideology
yeah,
and the vision. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There you go. Brilliant. So, Katya, anything to add to that? Because I'd imagine there's so much that is similar, but hey, obviously you're in a different business. So what's your take on your role?
So it is a little bit different. Definitely the same that COO has to wear many hats, and every day might be very different from the previous and the next. The main difference, I guess, is that because I'm also a co-founder and I started initially from day one as COO, having my other three co-founders, one talking to investors and being responsible for business development from day one. Another one being everything tech, right? Programming and everything IT related. So I don't need to worry about that. And the last but not least is executive producer background. And therefore, like production and like planning and everything has been initially done by him. And as we started as the game development studio, also the role changed a little bit. So now as the co-dev, I'm doing nearly everything Viki is doing. I'm more recently more involved into business development, partnering with our CEO. Also, like he's kind of a hunter and always was. And I am more a farmer. So he hunts, something, and then I need to make sure we can, properly work with that, and the client is happy and the work is delivered. And also like marketing, legal, tax, payments, all of that, whatever needs to be done has to be done. So I would rather summarize it as I mentioned already, enabling developers to develop. So to make sure that studio operates well, like in terms of talents being available, being happy, being productive, in terms of business working, then margins are healthy, and so like the runway is still there, and so you are not in troubles. And also addressing concerns of the employees and the market, as we had to in the past few years.
Actually, I would love to hear about your background, like how you got into this role. So, yeah, with you, Cassia, so you founded Redhill Games back in. Were you immediately into this like COO role from like day one, or is that something that evolved over time?
Well, it was kind of from day one, because when we looked at the complementing skills each of us bring to the table, we thought that who can be the best and add the most value to development of the young studio, a startup. So at first, we just invested our own money. You cannot really hire people and rent an office. You need to start building the idea before you go to investors or to anybody with something. So it's not just, our pretty faces and good backgrounds. These days, it's not enough at all, but back in the time, still, you need to show something to people you are speaking to. We thought, what's the best name for my role? Because it's literally everything which is not biz dev, tech, or game design, really, because that was what we were planning to do, our own game. And the best description was operating officer, right? So like all the other functions, all the other needs, whatever may come up would fall on my plate. And so over time, of course, we took more experts in. But at first, you have, if you don't know and don't have experience with, for example, go to market, you go read the book previously, right? Now you open ChatGPT or something and you ask people around. What helped quite a lot, the previous background. So I have background in legal and human resources. So I've been doing that. In terms of industries, I worked in fintech, in IT, and lately in gaming. And all of those like experiences and skills I gained over time were very helpful in building the role and making sure I'm supporting my co-founders and later on the team.
Yeah, and sorry, before we go to you, Viki, I'd love to. So that was a great explanation of like your role in that founding there, but I'm just fascinated about your history and that you've been, like you said, so you're at Cisco as like an HR lead for a long time and other variety of non-gaming companies. And then, yeah, you moved into, you're at Wargaming for about 3.5 years as head of HR. And then you founded your own game studio. So what was that leap from, you hadn't worked in the games industry before, then obviously you got into wargaming, and then at some point you're like, yeah, now I'm going to start my own game studio. So I'd love to hear like, how was that leap, and how has, I guess the follow-up question would be, how has all of that HR experience led to you being a successful COO?
First of all, going from IT to gaming wasn't a huge leap, although moving from the UK to Cyprus was. And the main idea was to combine experiences from ex-Soviet countries and Western world, because wargaming originated from one of the ex-Soviet Union countries. But moved to Europe, acquired several studios around the world. And it was needed to make sure that the company is truly international. So all this, background and legacy from CIS, from Soviet Union is not there because like the world operates differently. And then, meeting and working with the colleagues, we thought, we know better how to, create, run a company and build games. And in order to prove it, you need to start it yourself, right? Because otherwise you can tell people all about your experience, but if they think differently, you don't have proof to show that, that was a success case. I did it myself. So that was one of the reasons we decided to start our own company. Having legal and HR backgrounds from the past, from all these different countries, helped a lot. Because obviously, like 4 of us, we couldn't have developed a AAA game. And knowing how to put a team together, what skills and qualities are required on the regular employee floor, or, the leads and different expertises from whatever art to programming to design to community. So did help a lot. And also knowing different cultures, how they operate together, and what pitfalls you need to, assume are going to, face. That also was very helpful, and it took me, far with that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I only realized that now as you're talking about that not only are you both COOs of CoDev Studios, you both also come from backgrounds in HR. So Viki, but you didn't start out as the COO at Airship. So I'd love to hear your take on the answer of like all of your background in talent and HR. Like, how did you get into the role of COO, and how do you think your career experiences have like helped you do this role now?
Yeah, I mean, I never even wanted to work in recruitment and HR initially. I wanted to be an architect. That was my dream. Went to university, the economy crashed, so there were no jobs. Everything disappeared for me overnight. My dreams were crushed. I was always naturally creative, and that was but quite anal about detail, and so that architecture sort of draftsman area of work was really appropriate for me. So I pivoted, went and worked in recruitment. I ended up consulting. I did that for about 12 years, all in all. That period gave me a real commercial foundation, I think, understanding people, the situations that you can be presented with, but also business, how the problems that businesses face from a functionality point of view, and how people are genuinely the strength behind every business. And I just became fascinated with that, how structures and organizations work, and became more embedded and understood, restructures and the commercialities and the realities of, peaks and troughs, struggles, strategies, and just taught myself as much as I could in those years. Alongside that, I decided to retrain basically, and I did a leadership and management degree, and then I did a master's in HR because that gave me all the fundamental knowledge that it took to build a business from the ground up, because you can't build it without individuals in it. So, like Katya described, understanding the skills, principles, and the core needs. And after a brief sabbatical of about 6 months, joined Team 17 pre-IPO and helped them build out some departments internally, operationally, their recruitment HR departments, their operational processes, and that stretched out globally then, because they acquired a lot of other studios, and there was lots of to pay and activity and other operational changes. So it's quite transformational. Probably the biggest challenge I'd faced in my career to date at that point. And then just leaned more into the strategy stuff. When I left Team 17 and moved into a head of HR and ops role in a VR company. And then I joined Airship 4 years ago as the director of strategy, which was basically hearing Joe about all his dreams and aspirations for the company, auditing the company, understanding what was needed to change, what was needed to build, and building out roadmaps for the coming years, and what needed to transform, what needed to change, what we needed to omit, what we needed to integrate. And to be honest, I was invited into C-suite way earlier than ever expected. Again, that wasn't my goal at that point either. I just wanted to be useful. And I really found growing businesses. For Joe to invite me into, it was before I'd even passed probation, so it was a big moment of trust for him as well. Yeah, I've been there ever since. So looking back, I don't think any of it was especially sort of linear. But it makes a lot of sense to me now when I look back at my whole career. It all was feeding this kind of moment in time. It just collected like a smorgasbord of experience, I guess, that really leans into that sort of operational sort of lead. So I guess you're kind of like part operator, right? You're part strategist, part people lead, part problem solver. People never fail to present you with problems. So that just keeps you on your toes. And I think just over time, you just learn how to overcome pretty much any problem that you face. I feel like I'm best suited for companies that perhaps find themselves in that moment of reflection. They got from A to B, but they don't quite know what C looks like or how to get there. I think that's where I probably fit in best.
Yeah, great. And I think it feels like the big advantage of coming from a background in HR is that when you're dealing with one of those roles that handles all people in the company, you see every aspect of the company naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's similar to like how finance is just across the entire company is right as well, right? Yeah. So and also you've just all of this experience organizing and getting the best out of people, and then translates quite nicely into like then getting the best out of the business. Which so that's sorry, I was there trying to just summarize everything that you've both said into about 30 seconds, but it's really cool. Viki, how would you describe like success in this role then? Is there any like one key metric that you just look at to be like, okay, that means I'm successful? Or is it just a wide variety of things? Is it more qualitative and loose, or do you try and quantify it?
Yeah, I guess at Airship we're always trying to evaluate what success means for us, because it's not always about revenue or profit. Sometimes it's about reputation, it's about reach, it's about scope, it's about the success of the games that we've worked on in their whole, totality. Are they award-winning games? Are they the most visually acclaimed games? So I think from a creative standpoint, success means many things. I think from a commercial standpoint, success means many things. I don't think there is one real true answer to that. we're still standing, which I think, is representative of all of the hard work and toil that goes on in the background when an industry is really suffering, with its identity and its future. And we don't over pivot, we don't over change who we are or what we are. I feel like we adapt and evolve, which is really important. You've got to understand who you are as a business and change accordingly to what the market is demanding, but without kind of selling your soul, I guess, or completely changing who you are, because it removes all of that legacy effort I think that you've made over the years. And we've, been going for 15 years. I'm only 4 years into that story and that history. Hopefully it's future. But how we look at it year on year is, okay, what is the market tells? Like, how can we adapt and evolve to that? So I think in a smaller company, you are in the detail constantly. I think you're closer to the work. So decisions are much faster and you carry a lot more personal risk because there's no buffer. It's you against the market. There's no investors. Like, we're completely independent. And I think in a larger, more mature company, it becomes more about that alignment, that, communication, influencing, I guess, without always having direct control. It gives, like, specifically, as we all know, the unpredictability is just an absolute constant. Like, you're dealing with all that creative work, you're shifting client expectations, especially if you're in the work for hire space like us, your creative control is taken away because you're working for them, in effect. And I suppose an industry that can swing quite aggressively, you just can't be complacent. And I think as long as you don't get comfortable in your space, you don't take it for granted, you will always be successful because you're working for it. So I think there's, something quite unique about, planning hard and adapting. Yeah, when you're constantly balancing that creative and commercial reality, it can be a lot. To always maintain a level of, like, success, whatever that means. But if I was an outsider and had never heard of Airship before and I looked into them and the people that worked for them, people are really well respected in the industry. I'm always welcomed into rooms, regardless of my gender as well, which I find really refreshing. People come for repeat business. We get new business as well. So I think that reputational value for me is probably where the most success is represented. Joe might say a different thing. A head of department might say another. But most people, I would say, are proud to work there as well. Yeah, I think it's hard to quantify success, really, in just
Yeah.
a one-dimensional way.
Yeah, no, I like that. And obviously, you're thinking about the long-term success of the business, right? If you deliver quality work, you have a really high reputation, the culture is
Mhm.
efficient and working well and a great place to work, then, you look after all of these things and then money does come in. So I quite like that. Also, your point about being adaptable, but not pivoting too much. Yeah, the amount of times I've seen companies pivot themselves into death ultimately because they're just constantly just
Yeah, it is a death
flip-flopping.
spiral, sadly. Yeah, because they
Yeah,
have no experience in the space and that they do it quickly without much strategizing or forward
yeah.
planning. Find you've kind of lost who you are at that point, and it's hard to go back because
Mm.
that looks indecisive and people lose trust. Um, so not reinventing the wheel every time there's a hard moment, I think, is really important. Yes, evaluate what people are wanting and needing, and I wish the games industry would do that more with the players,
Yeah,
um, and make things that they actually want to play. But you know, from running a business point of view, yeah, success is hard to quantify, and you know, in one answer because it's quite ambiguous, isn't it? It's
yeah.
very subjective as well. But yeah, I would say, reputational value holds everything together because people know who you are for good reasons and will always come back. Culture when you run a remote studio is incredibly hard to maintain, but we try our best. I think that's probably one of our biggest, not struggles, but hurdles. Culture drivers. I think when you're a company that's global as well and you're all disbanded everywhere and you are fully remote, I've never been I've never been a fan of forced fun, so I don't feel like a company is responsible for its culture, in its totality. You can give tools and resources and listen, but really the people are the ones that build the culture. I think there's a real misunderstanding there sometimes between employees and the employer about who's responsible for what. Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest area, really, to try and get true success.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've been working remotely for 6 years now, funnily enough, since March 2020. Ca- Yeah,
It's
I
hard,
can
isn't it?
attest to that. Yeah, it is hard because, it's nice when you're like, we're on screen together now, like talking. As soon as this all turns off, there's no one here. But hey, Katya, I'd love to hear like, um, how do you define success in your role? Again, might be some similarities to what Vicky was saying, or perhaps not. Do you have a different take on that?
Absolutely agree with what Vicky said. I can only add that success in the CEO role also means on the stage of the company. So when you are at the very beginning, then, your growth, your ability to attract talent to a no-name company, and then started delivering and meeting your milestones, or getting a successful project to work on, that's success. When you're already a mature company, then keeping the culture intact, or like evolve it and make sure that employees are like happy and supportive and productive and whatnot, and your reputation is enhancing and growing and becoming better and better each day. When you already need to, do something radically different, even closing your studio or doing massive layoffs, as we see, in many cases, you would be the last to turn off the lights. And that means that's also like every process needs to be done professionally, and that will be success as well. Finishing something is like in a professional and graceful way is as important as starting something, because that's also adds on to the legacy of the company culture, of every person who worked in the studio previously. And that allows you to rebuild either on the same grounds or start something new. So you take it to the next place.
Yeah, I like that thought as well. I think about like the legacy of the company and just like executing professionally too. So appreciate that. And also, I asked the question: oh, do you quantify, or is it more qualified feedback on the success of your role? Knowing that if you're responsible for the wide variety of the business, that it probably sounds a bit more like whack-a-mole, right? Like it's like, oh, great, this department is running really well. There's a fire over here, and you just constantly on the move. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Hey, I was curious though. So about potentially hiring, or any advice you'd have for someone or a company wanting to add a COO. So interestingly, the most recent COO I've placed into our investment portfolio actually came from a background in production, and their role was much more about like, I guess, more similar to like a VP of production, head of production or something. And then like business operations was secondary in the skill set. So quite different, I guess, from the backgrounds that you come from. And then I know of someone else that again has gone into COO through finance or through business development. There's just so many varieties. So I guess the key thing is if a company doesn't have one yet, what telltale signs would you say to be like, hey, you need a COO, or you at least need someone owning the operations side? And then follow up would be, well, what advice would you have for them in terms of like what good looks like, or the type of personality or person that you think could be successful in that? So Katya, what do you think? What do you think? I guess the first point was like, at what point do you think a company should need a COO? Considering you said you were there from day one, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Well, it's probably obvious question. It depends really on what company does and what aiming for, and so what are other skills which are available. And in case a company, which I assume is not a startup with no name and no nothing, wants to hire a COO, my first question to them, like to CEO or to board, would be why, right? So why do you think you need one? Which problems you want to solve with this position? Because as you mentioned yourself, the composition of the responsibilities and remit can be very different. And sometimes something financial is missing, and then it's the main angle. Sometimes production is suffering, and you may think that COO may solve that. In a starting company, I would say that probably some HR background is helpful, not necessarily a person who worked in HR previously, all the time, but somebody who had deal with people and therefore they understand the need, the skills, the composition of a successful team and things like that. And that also helps building the pipelines and production schedules and making sure that your team can deliver. In case, like in Viki's case, strategy was a missing part, right? And so all over time, very quickly, it became obvious that strategy, it's not just talking about it, right? It's executing as well. And where you can better contribute to make sure strategy is complemented with the good tactics. So this is where strategy officer suddenly becomes the chief operating officer, because it's not only giving the ideas, but also making sure they are executed. So from that perspective, again, going back, why do you need it? Which problem you want to solve? And then based on that, decide what are the best or most helpful backgrounds the person would be coming with. That would be my take.
Yeah. I was also thinking about when I discuss COO hiring with founders in our investment portfolio, I think a common theme, regardless of the person they hire, tends to be that they're complementary to the CEO. And I was just thinking about Viki had mentioned in one of her summaries previously in this conversation about that as well. Like the example I just gave recently of the COO that I hired recently, the COO that I hired recently, the CEO was really struggling to handle all of the other business operations side because he was focused on money in the bank from investors and revenue, and also making sure there's talent in the company. So they really need someone to take over that piece. So yeah, Viki, it was that with that anecdote about you being the right hand person to the CEO. Is that the case? And also, what's your thought about when would be a good time to hire a COO?
It's a difficult one because I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to this. It's very dependent on the CEO. I think I wouldn't hire a CEO because the company's growing. I'd hire one because growth is starting to break stuff. I think some of the signals are pretty obvious if you're quite honest about them. Usually the signs are the CEO's stuck in the weeds, like you've just described, can't focus on all the operational stuff and sort of stay focused on direction as well. Decisions end up getting bottlenecked at the top. Execution is inconsistent with all good intent. A CEO is only capable of doing so many things at once. So some things might start flying and some things might get benched and forgotten about, and they're equally important. So I feel like if the business is solving the same problems repeatedly instead of structurally fixing them, then that's probably the signs. I think hiring too early or too late is a risk, and I think you have to really know that moment in time when, as a CEO, it's time to have somebody more than just a board advisor, helping you once a month or whatever. And then when you go to market, I don't think there's a singular correct background either. I think there's just certain patterns that tend to work better. Consulting backgrounds are quite common because they're built around a more structured thinking, problem solving, the ability to operate in very vague, ambiguous situations, indecisive CEOs, those sorts of things. I think the risk can stay a little bit too theoretical if they haven't really owned any outcomes, which is why that working in that sort of consulting strategy space first, I felt was really important for me. But fellow COOs that I know often come from very similar backgrounds, actually, very white collar, very HRy, very financy, strategy, because they've experienced things beyond their lane. So I think that they understand things outside of their little system. They understand the whole functions behind how a business runs, because HR touches everything. Production or project management is great because it's all about planning, outcomes, things that could go wrong. There's lots of kind of forward planning there, and building workflows. I feel, if you've been in a situation where you've owned outcomes and you've not just contributed, you'd be brilliant. I think if you worked across multiple functions, you'd be brilliant. Having difficult conversations, you can't really be precious. If your idea or your suggestion isn't the one that you go with. I've worked with so many CEOs where I've told them risks or dangers and they've not taken advice and it's gone terribly wrong. You can't go, I told you so. At the end, you've kind of got to swallow that and go, well, I did suggest an alternative solution or an alternative pathway, and we went with yours. I'm not here to argue. I'm just here to advise. And as long as you don't work with friction, I think and you're quite resilient, thick-skinned, good in a crisis, then I think you would probably operate well in a COO space and not be tempted just to fix the issue, but look at why the issue exists in the first place. So yeah, it's about putting the fire out, but then identifying how the fire became one in the first place. So you're kind of like a walking fire extinguisher.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. Executioner and extinguisher at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, hey, we're coming up to close on the end of the podcast episode here. Before I go to my classic final question, is there anything that either of you two wanted to mention about your role as a COO or anything that we haven't managed to get to today that you're keen to voice? Or if not, I just want to make sure we covered everything.
No, let me look at my notes actually. Let me open them and see what I'd wrote, because I've not
Yeah.
even followed what I wrote initially, because I've just been talking
No,
about.
good.
There was a couple of areas actually, like advice for aspiring leaders, and I wrote some bits on like the stuff we don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of areas like that, but they were just like garbled notes, just in case it went down any of those routes.
Yeah.
But
No, that's a good point. Actually, I think I almost forgot to ask about like if someone wanted to aspire to be a COO, because obviously, like we've touched on it like in roundabout ways, as in we've talked about how you two became like into your roles and what success looks like. But if you spoke to someone, say early, mid, or even senior, and they're like, "My goal is to be a COO," what would you respond in that situation?
for myself, it was starting earlier than you think you need to. I mean, I am only 40 and I feel quite privileged to be in a position like this, but I just stayed curious. So it wasn't just about learning my own discipline, but everybody else's around me, how they all kind of touched and linked, and how so just understood the DNA for within a business, really, that how the money flows, how the decisions are made, and kind of what really drives growth. Are you a product? Are you a service? And then what is your market? Understand like that success chain, I suppose, what keeps your business open. I probably always thrived more when things are a bit vague because I'm nosy. So I like going snooping around and auditing and finding out, things that people have swept under the carpet. So yeah, just be comfortable with that sort of ambiguity. There's no point in, when you suddenly feel ready for leadership, there isn't ever a point like that. You kind of just fall into these positions, I've found. Invest in your communication was one of the biggest tips I ever had from a manager of my own. And I went and did neurolinguistics, which is a way of talking and communicating, I suppose, with people in tricky situations, getting the most out of others. Being able to say things like calmly at the right time, with highest leverage, all those sorts of things, because sometimes you can be in a boardroom, but sometimes you can be in a disciplinary, sometimes you can be just in a casual chat with an employee who's going through a really tough time. You've got to switch on all these different sort of, versions of yourself. But I think one misconception about leadership is that you always have the answers, and you absolutely do not. I don't think it's about, guessing or stabs in the dark. So we've still got to do those as well. But I think you just got to be willing to make certain calls, take certain risks, own them, own it when things go wrong as well. Go, my bad. Like, we tried and failed at that, and it's that being okay. I don't think there's any real time when you go, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to take on like a C-suite role. They kind of just come out of the blue for most people, I think. I never aspired to be in C-suite. I don't know about you, Katya. I'd love to own my own company one day, but I enjoy the space that I'm in at the moment. So just learn, absorb, get stuff wrong, I think, and learn by, doing, I think is the only really advice if you're aspiring to get into the C-suite.
Yeah. Katya, anything to add there?
Few things. Absolutely agree with what Viki said. That all makes perfect sense. Maybe first to think if what drives you to want to be in a C-suite. Of course, first of all, growing your career, progressing, and everything doesn't necessarily mean you need to become a C-level executive, because that brings also very different responsibilities. And also you need to think that up there, it could be very lonely. And when things go well, then it's all because of the team, right? And you need to be comfortable with that. So it's not your achievements, but that's achievement of your team. But when things go wrong, then you are one of the responsible people. And as Viki said, you need to admit it and you need to own the responsibilities and try to turn things
Katya's
around.
cut out of it.
And
This is
if
where
you
the
think you're
editing
comfortable
comes
with
in.
that, you like
Oh.
leading.
Katya, sorry,
Yes.
we lost you there. We lost you there for a little bit. Would you mind?
Since then.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you mind just repeating that answer there? It's all right. We're going to edit it out. It'd be great. So don't worry.
Like from the very beginning.
Yeah. That'd be
From the
good.
lonely bit,
Yeah,
I
so-
got to. I feel that was the bit for me.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So like adding to what Viki said, is important to understand what drives you to want to become a C-level executive. And that requires also like conscious thinking what success for you personally means. Because you can grow your career differently. You can become best in class technical artist. And it doesn't mean that you take the whole responsibilities for the company, but you are still compensated well, you are well respected, everybody listens to your opinion. And I think one of the most important things, which I rarely talked about, that in the C-level, it's very often very lonely and you are responsible for failures mainly, and success is because of your team. And you need to be comfortable with that. So you cannot, well, you can, of course, but bragging about your achievements, but you didn't do it yourself, right? That's your team whom you put together, assembled and supported, but it's their win. But if something goes wrong, you take responsibilities and admitting it is a mistake. And then, taking the extinguisher, putting down the fire and making sure it doesn't happen again, correcting the issues and making sure that the company goes forward differently. So from that perspective, not only COO, but pretty much any C-level role would require very conscious understanding that that's exactly what you want. Because also you do not really 100% belong to yourself anymore. And people look up at you, and investors look up, and partners look up, and that's also, you are in the spotlight. And again, if you're uncomfortable, you can train yourself to go out of the comfort zone, but better you are not struggling with that, because then it's a day-to-day struggle.
Great. And yeah, and I'd imagine heightened even more so in a remote or distributed company, where if you've got that person, if you've got the C-suite right behind you, like in the same room or the same building as you, but if you're just on your own in your house, I'd imagine that's heightened even more so.
Virtual hugs.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks so much, you two. And yeah, we are about to hit time now. So I guess my last question for both of you, and I have asked this to everybody that has ever been on this podcast, is what is your favorite interview question? Do either of you two want to answer that first?
Yeah. Well, I think the good one was what actually COO is and what COO does, because it is so diverse and different everywhere. With one question, we managed to cover so much, right? With backgrounds, with day-to-day, with responsibilities and all of that. So I think that was a good question for this talk.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. How about you, Viki? Have you got a favorite? No. Yeah. And also how, I guess, vulnerable they're willing to be. Because, if someone asks what's your biggest failure, you could just give them a failure that it ends up wrapped up quite nicely and they look good. It's like, if someone's like, okay, this is going to make me potentially look horrendous on this call, but I'm going to just tell you anyway. I kind of like those stories. Yeah. And so I don't want to leave it on the cliffhanger. You were like, I'll explain the psychology of that, ask you what animal you are question at some other point in time. Are you able to summarize very briefly? And also, what animal were you? I'd love to know. Yeah. Yeah.
Joe, who you would be?
But what type of animal would I be? Yeah. You know what? The one that came to mind first was a fox. And that's because I lived in London. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Well, thing is with foxes, right? They're very often misunderstood. So they mate for life. So I don't know. I've been with my wife since I was like 19. So I was like, there's one. Yeah, there you go. And the males are often like going out and just scrounging anything that they can for their kids and their partner back in their den. And I'm like, yeah, I can relate to that. And also they eat anything, foxes. So I can also relate to that as well. So, and yeah, they're very cute, but they can fight if they're backed into a corner. So again, I can relate to that too. So that would be my answer. But mostly because whenever I saw a fox in London, I'd always just think they're super cute. So there you go.
Especially when they're red, yeah, like, ginger.
Yeah, exactly. And on that rather lovely bombshell, I'll just want to thank you both. Like, it was a really fun conversation, fun way to wrap up the season as well. So thank you, and hopefully I'll see you both at some point in person soon. So thanks very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And